There is a kind of man who walks into a room and says nothing. He does not announce himself. He does not explain his presence. He simply sits and watches and waits. Most people in that room will never understand what he is doing. They will fill the silence with their own noise, their own plans, their own ambitions spoken too loudly to people who were never meant to hear them. And by the time they realize what happened, the quiet man has already moved. I learned this early, not from a book, not from a mentor, from watching what happened to the people who could not stop talking. There is something in human nature that desperately wants to be seen, wants to be recognized, wants the world to confirm that the work was real, that the sacrifice mattered, that the vision was correct. And I understand that want. I have felt it myself. But I made a decision very early in my life that that want would never be in charge of me. Because the moment you need the world to see you, you have given the world power over you. And I have spent my entire life arranging things so that the world has as little power over me as possible. That is not cynicism. That is not coldness. That is a form of freedom most people never experience because they are too busy performing their lives for an audience that does not care about them and will not remember them. The market taught me this before anything else did. I remember sitting with numbers that made no sense to me at the time. Not because the numbers were complicated, but because everyone around me was reacting to noise, newspaper headlines, dinner table panic, friends calling with certainty about what was going to happen next. The entire world seemed to have an opinion, and every opinion seemed urgent, and every urgency seemed designed specifically to make me do something I had not yet decided to do. I did nothing. Not because I was confident, not because I knew something they did not, but because I had already learned that motion without clarity is just expensive confusion wearing the costume of action. I sat. I read. I thought. And when the noise finally died down, which it always does, I could see the actual shape of things, the real value, the thing that was there before the panic and would be there after it. That is what most people call patience. I call it resistance, because patience sounds passive. What I am describing is active. It is a daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes minute-by-minute decision to not be moved by things that are designed to move you. The financial world is engineered to create reaction. Every headline, every forecast, every urgent alert exists not to inform you, but to activate you. To make you feel that stillness is danger and movement is safety. This is the inversion of truth. And most people live their entire financial lives inside that inversion without ever knowing it. I made a different choice. I decided that my decisions would come from inside, not outside. From long study and slow conviction, not from consensus and urgency. And over decades, that single discipline compounded into something most people could not explain because they were looking for the clever trade or the brilliant insight when the real answer was simply that I had stopped listening to the wrong things. But there is a darker layer to this, one I do not hear discussed often. It is not only the market noise you must resist, it is the human noise. And human noise is far more dangerous because it arrives wearing the face of friendship, of family, of love. People who care about you will give you their fear. They will call it concern. They will wrap their anxiety in the language of caution, and you will feel their words in a way you never feel a newspaper headline because they are people you trust and love and do not want to disappoint. And yet their fear, given with the most genuine care in the world, is still their fear. It is shaped by their experience, their limitations, their unspoken wounds. It has almost nothing to do with your actual situation, but it lands in you as if it does. I learned to love people and receive their fear with warmth and then quietly set it aside. That is not cruelty. That is self-preservation. Because a man who absorbs every fear given to him by the people around him will eventually become a living archive of other people's limitations. And he will call it wisdom. There is also something far less gentle at work in the people around you. Something that even good people do not acknowledge in themselves. Envy. Not the dramatic envy of villains. The quiet envy of ordinary people watching someone they know begin to separate from the pack. Begin to move differently. begin to accumulate something, whether money or clarity or peace, that they have not yet found for themselves. That envy does not always announce itself as hostility. Sometimes it comes as excessive curiosity, too many questions about your finances, your plans, your investments, your timeline. It comes dressed as interest, as support, as friendship. And when you answer those questions, when you open the door to your actual numbers and your actual strategy, something shifts. You cannot always see it immediately, but it shifts. People begin to relate to you differently. Some pull away, some become subtly competitive. Some will, without ever intending harm, mention what you told them to someone else, and that someone else will mention it further. And what was once private information becomes ambient noise in your environment. And ambient noise has consequences. I made a decision long ago that I would never speak my actual numbers to anyone who did not have a legal or professional reason to know them. Not to boast, not to complain, not to bond, not to be humble, not to be relatable. Numbers are leverage. Your numbers are your leverage. The moment someone else holds them, they hold a kind of power over you that you cannot fully anticipate or control. I have watched men lose negotiating positions because the other party already knew what they were worth. I have watched men lose friendships because the friend could not reconcile the number with the person they thought they knew. I have watched men lose their own relationship with money because they began performing their wealth for other people's reactions instead of actually managing it. The number is private. It stays private, always, and this extends far beyond net worth. Your next move is private. The business you are building, the investment you are studying, the opportunity you are circling, the partnership you are considering. These things have a fragility before they become real. They exist in a state where doubt from outside can actually alter their outcome. Not because doubt has magic power, but because when you speak a plan before it is complete, you invite the world to evaluate something that is not ready to be evaluated. The world will give you its opinion. The world always gives its opinion, and the opinion will carry weight because you asked for it, and some of that weight will settle in you as hesitation, as second-guessing, as a slow erosion of the clean conviction you had before you opened your mouth. I have had ideas that I knew were sound, ideas that, had I pursued them in silence, would have reached completion. But I spoke about them before the right time, and the feedback I received was not wrong exactly, but it was premature. It addressed a version of the idea that was not finished yet. And the criticism attached itself to the idea and slowed it. Silence protects the unfinished. Silence is the incubator. I have a term for the discipline that underlies all of this. I call it the shadow position. The shadow position is not about hiding. It is not about deception. It is about understanding that in any competitive environment, which every environment ultimately is, the party with less information about you holds less leverage over you. And the shadow position is the conscious, consistent practice of minimizing the information you emit while maximizing the information you receive. Most people do the opposite. They broadcast and they half listen. They announce and they receive validation. They share and they feel temporarily satisfied by the sharing. The shadow position is inverted. You listen fully, you share selectively. You observe everything and reveal only what serves a specific, deliberate purpose. This is not manipulation. Manipulation is using false information to move people. What I am describing is simply the decision about what true information to share and when. Every skilled negotiator understands this. Every patient investor understands this. Every person who has ever protected something important while it was still becoming what it needed to become understands this. The shadow position also means you are comfortable being underestimated. This is harder than it sounds. There is something in the human ego that recoils at being underestimated, being thought smaller than you are, being dismissed, being overlooked. It activates something old in us, something primal, and the reflex is to correct the record, to demonstrate, to prove. But the person who needs to prove themselves has already surrendered their advantage. I have been underestimated many times, by competitors, by journalists, by people in rooms who did not know who they were speaking to. And every single time I made the same choice. I let them underestimate me. I let the assumption live. Because an opponent who underestimates you makes predictable errors. They leave gaps. They allocate their caution in the wrong direction. The forest does not announce which trees are oldest. The river does not announce which section runs deepest. Power that is visible is power that can be calculated, countered, and challenged. Power that is invisible simply operates. I think often about what I will give to my children, not what I will leave them, what I will give them. There is a difference. Leaving implies transfer after the fact. Giving implies an ongoing act during life. And the thing I will give them is not money. Money given freely and early to people who did not build it is one of the most reliable ways to destroy them. I have seen this. I have watched fortunes handed to people who had not yet developed the relationship with difficulty that makes wealth manageable, and the money does not elevate them. It accelerates whatever was already there. If there is discipline, the money amplifies discipline. If there is confusion, the money amplifies confusion. If there is entitlement, the money amplifies entitlement until the entitlement consumes everything. The inheritance a child needs is not a number. It is a way of seeing, a tolerance for discomfort, an understanding that the gap between wanting something and having it is not an injustice to be resolved immediately, but a space to be navigated with intelligence and patience. If I give my children that, they will build their own numbers, and those numbers will mean something to them because they know exactly what was exchanged for them. If I give them only money, I have given them a shortcut to a destination they do not know how to inhabit. The guarantee is the danger. The certainty of inheritance removes the need for development. And a person without development is a person without resilience. And a person without resilience cannot hold wealth even when wealth is handed directly to them. What I will give them is harder to give and harder to receive. But it will outlast any number I could transfer. There is one more thing I keep private: success. Not because I am ashamed of it, not because I want to appear modest, but because success that is broadcast becomes a target and a story. And once it becomes a story, you begin to live in relation to the story instead of in relation to reality. I have seen men trapped by their own reputation, trapped by the version of themselves that was published, celebrated, and widely accepted. And slowly, sometimes imperceptibly, they began making decisions not from clear thinking, but from the need to remain consistent with the image, to not contradict the narrative, to not disappoint the expectation. The reputation became the prison. I will not let the story of my success constrain the reality of my thinking. The thinking must remain free, free to be wrong, free to change direction, free to admit I do not know, free to be exactly at odds with everything I previously said. That freedom is worth more than any reputation, and so I protect it by not building a reputation that I then become obligated to maintain. The same is true of pain, what I have lost, who I have lost, where I have failed, and how deeply those failures cut. These things are mine. They are not content. They are not lessons for a larger audience. They are the actual texture of a life lived, and they belong to the life, not to the performance of the life. When pain is shared for connection, for the genuine human need to not be alone in suffering, it can be healing. But when pain is shared for attention, for validation, for the signal it sends to observers about the depth and complexity of your character, it becomes something else. It becomes currency spent in a market you should never have entered. I keep my losses close, not to avoid them. I sit with them often, but I sit with them alone or with the one or two people in my life who have earned that room. Because some things are only legible in silence, and some wounds only close when they are not constantly reopened for an audience. I have lived long enough now to see the full arc of certain decisions, to watch what happens to people who chose loudly, moved quickly, shared everything, and sought constant confirmation. And I have watched what happened to the ones who moved quietly, waited fully, shared selectively, and built their conviction from the inside out. The difference is not always visible in the short term. Loud people win in the short term. Loudness creates momentum. Momentum creates attention. Attention creates opportunity. And so for a period, sometimes a long period, the loud strategy appears to be working. But wealth is not a sprint. It is a decades-long accumulation of correct decisions compounding quietly in the background while everyone is distracted by the performances happening in the foreground. The patient ones are still standing when the performances end. The ones who protected their information are still holding positions that cannot be undermined by people who do not know they exist. The ones who gave their children difficulty instead of comfort are watching those children navigate the world with a competence that cannot be purchased. The ones who never published their pain are still in full possession of the interiority that makes clear thinking possible. This is not a philosophy of fear. It is a philosophy of precision. Fear contracts. This expands. Fear avoids. This selects. Fear hides. This positions. There is a version of silence that is weakness. The silence of a man who has nothing to say, no conviction to protect, no position worth defending. That silence is not what I am describing. The silence I am describing is the silence of the deep forest at 4 in the morning, alive with everything, containing everything, moving slowly toward an outcome that is already decided. The man who masters this will not be remembered for how loudly he spoke. He will be remembered for what remained when the noise was gone. And some of us prefer that.